Welcome to the Growing Through It podcast. We're here with Dr. Stephanie Sarkis, a psychotherapist specializing in anxiety, gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, and ADHD. She's the author of 8 books, a senior contributor for Forbes Online and Psychology Today, is the host of the Talking Brains podcast, and is based in Tampa Bay, Florida. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jen.
And of course, let's talk about a personal fun fact about yourself.
Sure. I have a Brittany, which is like a pointer. He's 9 months old and he's got a lot of energy. So before we start recording, we're talking about how we walk on about 6 miles a day. And he gets to the park in the morning and in the evening. He's got a little crew of dog friends. He has a best friend that's a Great Dane that he hangs out with.
That must be the cutest picture.
Yeah, and he can actually stand under the Great Dane now because he's probably going to he's not going to get much taller. He's about 40 pounds. So he's like a true kind of medium dog. But he's won 2 best of breed ribbons. And then he got we took him on an AKC field test where they put a quail in some bushes. And then you have to just like find the quail, not you, but the dog. The dog has to find the quail. Right, you got to find it. You're like, hey, look, dog, I found it. Now he has to find it. And then point at it, and that's like it basically. So he got points for that. So, and he's a novice trick dog, so he has an AKC title for doing tricks. So, his name's Connor, and he has his own Instagram page, Connor the Brit. So.
Oh, I'm going to start following after this because I'm sitting here trying to get the picture in my mind. So
he's a cutie pie. He's got freckles.
He's gained a new follower in me.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that.
Good. Oh, you're welcome.
All right. So excuse my croaky voice here, but how did you start specializing in studying toxic behavior?
I noticed over probably the last 6 or 7 years that people with ADHD, which that's what I originally specialized in, starting in practice 22 years ago, that people are starting to mention feeling like they were the sole problem in the relationship. And they were finding that their ADHD was weaponized against them. And what I mean by that is that someone was told that they were less than because of their ADHD, that if only their ADHD was quote unquote fixed, that the relationship would be fine. And when I started talking more with them about what their experience was in the relationship, it sounded like emotional abuse. And the term gaslighting started coming out around, it's been around since the 1930s, 1940s. There was actually a movie called Gaslight that the term's based on, but it really started becoming used more in everyday language around 2015, 2016. So I had people now, especially like younger people like Gen Z will call me and say, I think I'm being gaslit in my relationship or in my family or at work, friendship. So I started noticing more people being open about it because I think emotional abuse has kind of been seen as an invisible form of abuse, that we know what physical abuse is, but we are kind of not as well versed in the general public, as well versed in what emotional abuse looks like. What in the UK they call coercive control, threatening, telling people their reality is not real. And I find that when you have any kind of medical issue, whether that's ADHD or depression or anxiety or diabetes or anything else, you're vulnerable, and you are more vulnerable to someone like this preying on you. And also, if you're in the grieving process, you're more likely to have somebody that's a narcissist or a sociopath prey on you. So that's where it got started, is that more and more people were telling me, wait a second, this is an issue. And then I wrote an article on Psychology Today, 12 warning signs of gaslighting, that went viral. So people are really kind of hungry for this information, that there was a word to put with what they've been experiencing. And that led to the gaslighting book, which led to the Healing from Toxic Relationships book.
Wow. So it just kind of came to you, and it came out of your original, I guess, specialty of ADHD. And you named a bunch of different narcissism, gaslighting, but
right.
Is there, a type? What does it look like? What does toxic behavior look like? Are they all different? Are there some common themes among all of the different ones?
Good question. Because there are some common themes of toxic people, which are a manipulation, which if we think about advertising, that's also manipulation, but it's trying to get somebody to do something that you want them to do that's not in their best interest, is how I would define manipulation. So sometimes manipulation isn't always a bad thing. Like if we know how to get around like a customer service phone system. Like we know to keep pressing 0 to get through. You could classify that as a mild form of manipulation, manipulating the system. But then there's manipulation of people. And that involves, again, like gaslighting in particular is a form of emotional abuse, where you tell someone that what they saw or heard isn't what happened, or that you project your stuff onto them. So you accuse them of cheating and tell them, I need to look at your phone because I think you're cheating, when in fact you're the person that's cheating. So there are different forms of toxic behavior. There's the physical abuse. There's also emotional abuse, like we've spoken about. Also financial economic abuse. So like in the case of people with ADHD, sometimes they've been in relationships where the person said to them, you need to turn over all your assets to me, all your accounts, because you have ADHD and you can't handle your money. Now, some people with ADHD do have issues with money management, but that doesn't mean that you turn over all your accounts, because now people are put on allowance, or they have to, be behaved, good behavior, quote unquote, in order to get money. So money is determined by what their partner thinks is, if they're being good or not. So there's also sexual abuse. So there's also digital abuse, which is like revenge porn stuff, and also hacking into people's accounts. So there's different forms of this umbrella of toxic behavior and domestic violence.
God,
and there's a continuum.
Like a mild? Is there ever mild? Or?
Because a relationship rarely starts with physical abuse. So it ramps up to that. So usually what happens is in the beginning of this toxic relationship, you have love bombing. So you're told that you're the best thing ever, that this person's never felt this way, that they will push for commitment really early on. And then once they get that commitment, they'll have different ways of trying to secure that commitment. Like, are you 100% on board? Are we together now? Like, they'll kind of push for that signal. And when they do, then they'll start devaluing. So they start picking at you. So they'll pick at maybe what you're wearing or your body type. And then that starts escalating to verbal abuse. And then that gets into eventually physical abuse. And that greatly increases the chances of you getting killed. So it's a gradual incline through that process. And there's also this thing called trauma bonding, because I know I'm throwing a lot of terms out there, but trauma bonding is where you go from that love bombing phase to an explosion of violent behavior, whether that's emotional violence or physical violence. And then you get into reconciliation phase. So and here's another term, the toxic person will try to hoover or suck the person back into the relationship. So then when they go back to the relationship, then that cycle starts all over again. And people can become bonded to toxic people because of that cycle. Your brain gets hooked on those high highs and low lows.
Does it always escalate? Is there ever a case or cases? I know it's not an always, but I never thought of it as a escalation process. Is that typical?
It is, and especially going from emotional abuse to verbal to physical. I see that quite a bit. Now, the physical abuse, sometimes it's more, there are varying degrees of it, but even something like blocking your exit from somewhere is physical abuse. Backing you up against a wall, physical abuse. It's any intention where you're using or abusing somebody's physical body to get power and control over them. So it may be that someone's in a relationship, they said, well, I think it's just verbal abuse. And I don't mean just, but it's, and then I start talking to people and it turns out that, well, they shoved you, but the person will say, well, I said something back to them and then they shoved me. I go, that's still physical abuse.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So I think if we start looking more at the behavior, people sometimes realize that physical abuse has been happening in that relationship.
Right. Because that wasn't in my mind that, if you're blocking an exit or if you're, even just backing someone in the corner, that wasn't even in my mind that can be considered physical abuse. Right. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Now, where do these behaviors come? I want to deal with the toxic person first before we get to the survivors and the victims. But where does it come from? And I know there's different things, right? A narcissist and different categories. But is there a common theme among those who have the toxic behaviors?
There can be two different types mainly of this behavior. One is, I think some people are just born with bad brain wiring. There can be people that have pretty healthy parents and the person is born with a brain that gets a dopamine boost from manipulating people. So we usually get a dopamine boost. That's one of those feel-good brain chemicals. We get it from playing with our kids or petting our dog or doing a good job at work. but they get dopamine from successful manipulation. And it's almost like the bigger the target that they can kind of get, the more dopamine boost they have. So that type of person may seek out somebody that has high social standing, well educated, put together, because if they're able to manipulate them, then they get a bigger sense of accomplishment. Then there are people that grew up with parents that had toxic behaviors. So in that case, we watch our parents like a hawk for how we're supposed to behave as an adult. So if you grew up with a parent that pitted you against your siblings, that told you that you weren't any good, that you could never please, that you were damned if you did, damned if you didn't, you can carry those behaviors into adulthood and not realize that you're using those same patterns for your relationships now. And I've had people call me and tell me, I think I'm the one that's toxic, or I think I'm the gaslighter, because I realize that, I'm having relationships that aren't working out, and that people are telling me the same thing, that, that you're being controlling. And so you see people that do seek help because they realize this is something that they want to change. And when someone realizes they want to change, there's a lot of hope available for that person as far as attending therapy and changing some of those behaviors. It's a lot of work, but you can change those behaviors. For someone that has bad brain wiring, or they qualify for a diagnosis like narcissistic personality disorder, it's more difficult to treat that, because people that have those disorders tend to have what are called egocentric personalities. And that means that they think that everyone else has a problem and they're fine. So if you mention therapy to that person, they'll say, what? I know more than the therapist does, or I don't need to go to a therapist. They think they're fine. Most of us an ego dystonic personality, which means if we do something that's not congruent with our beliefs or values, we feel kind of funny about it, maybe guilty about it. Like an extreme example would be if we rob a bank, we might have issues with that because we're thinking, well, that doesn't really align with my, beliefs or values. So that's a normal thing to feel, right? So, but if you have this bad brain wiring, or have learned this is an okay form of behavior, then you may not, again, seek help, because you just think it's your partner. You don't think it's you.
Well, I'm even surprised. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that people have called and said, hey, I've noticed a theme, like that they're actually self-aware enough. And because in my mind, I could see someone being, like you just said, not it. Like, it's not me, it's them. So right. I'm pleasantly surprised to hear people actually call you up and say, hey, maybe I've got a problem. It
takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to say, hey, something's really wrong with how I'm doing stuff and I need help. Yeah. That's hard to ask for help anyway. But to be the person that admits that, hey, I'm doing something that's wrong, or that I'm hurting other people and I need help, that takes a lot of introspection. And again, therapy can be a long process if you have grown up with that type of parent, but there's also trauma associated with it. So sometimes we talk about the trauma that people went through. That again, when you're raised with parents that were abusive or had active addictions, you developed some of those behaviors as a way to survive.
Right. Now, with a brain wiring situation, the one that you mentioned, is it something that can be treated in childhood so it doesn't get to be toxic behavior in adulthood?
Sometimes, yeah. I think if you catch it really early. But there have also been cases where you look at people that are sociopaths, that they knew from an early age that their brain was different. And sometimes you can treat it, sometimes you can't. But as always, early intervention is key. So the best thing that we can do is, if we see behaviors that seem to be leaning towards, you've got a kid on the playground that's like conning other kids or pitting kids against each other, that we really need to take a look at. Can we have early intervention? And are the parents willing to have a child have early intervention? Because you have to have the parents on board too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned earlier that there are certain people that tend to get, I guess, preyed on more. So I don't want to put this as, people may be more susceptible to getting into
people are more susceptible. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's their fault at all.
Okay.
Right.
I just want to make sure.
No one is immune to someone like this preying on them. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think everyone, I get asked a lot, if I've been in a relationship like that, who hasn't really? I mean, if you think about like workplace and romantic relationships and family and friends, there's somebody in your life that has just not been good for you and not had your best interest in mind.
Yeah.
Everybody.
I like that Yeah, I like that you just expanded it because I think in my mind we were talking about kind of partner relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Romantic relationships. Right. So yeah, once you expand it to your family, which we are going to talk about, and work, and then someone's been in your sphere at some point. And
yeah, I mean, you can be love bombing a job interview. You're told you're the best interviewee they've ever had, and they can't wait to hire you, and they want to you can start tomorrow, and it's way over the top.
Oh, I didn't
and then once you
that.
join, once you get on board, then you realize how pathological they
are. Oh, wow. That's never happened.
And any company that says that they're a family, you got to be really careful because it's usually a dysfunctional family.
Oh, that's interesting.
And you'll be asked to do things like, well, you know, we're a family and we all stick up for each other. And you're like, yeah, but you're also going to be paying me overtime. Right. They're like, no, you just need to, you know, cancel whatever you're doing and just work here. Yeah, I'm getting paid overtime. No, we're a family. We work things out together. So you see that kind of behavior, that there's a guilting that happens when a company portrays themselves as a family. I'm not saying all of them do that, but if a company says that we're a big family here, that usually means fuzzy boundaries.
Got it. Okay. That's maybe a red flag when you're interviewing someone. Over indulging your ego, perhaps, is one, and then saying we're a family. Anything else? If people are in a job interview process?
At an interview where you have someone, so let's say you're being interviewed by a team. Somebody steps outside and they're already trash talking the person that just left and said, oh, well, if you join, you know, don't talk to them, because, you know, they're basically triangulating. Triangulating means you're getting a third party involved. So you're talking through somebody. So you're saying, you know, don't talk to him, or he's a bad employee, or, you know, they're pitting you against that person already. Or that person said when he read your resume, you know, this, and this about you. But I didn't want to tell you, but I thought you had a right to know. I thought you had a right to know is a standard phrase from toxic people. And they will tell you usually a lie about what the person said. Well, he said that, you know, because you have this on your resume, that you're not very bright. But, you know, I thought you had a right to know that. So they'll start doing stuff like that when someone leaves the room. So when the person comes back, you automatically have negative feelings towards them because that's human nature. When that person probably never said anything like that at all. But here's somebody trying to start drama already. So that person sits back with their popcorn and watches the negativity between you and the other person.
Wow. Yeah.
The classic one is mother-in-laws.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about mother-in-laws. Yeah. I'm lucky to have a good one that stays out of things.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yeah. So it's when you have, classic one would be the mother-in-law trying to, the stereotypical thing we think of is the husband's mother, that tries to pit the husband against the wife and says something like, you know, you could have done better. You know, she just doesn't parent the kids well. And, you know, like constantly feeding information. You know, I saw that she was telling somebody else about what you did. And You know, so it's constant feeding of negativity. I've also seen cases where the grandparent tries to get to the grandchildren, and they will say things to the grandchildren like, your parents, you know, they just haven't been nice to me. And, you know, they put so many rules on you. And, you know, in my house, we just don't have rules. Is that nicer? And they'll catch the grandparents texting this to the grandkids. And so there have been families where there's a block on their phone from the grandparents because the grandparents are trying to align the grandchildren with them and against the parents.
Yeah, there was a friend of mine who actually had the grandparent send this ultra conservative book to the grandkid and put money in there for the kid to read it. And luckily she intercepted it. And because it's just propaganda. It wasn't anything like a legit book. It was
that's actually a common thing is to mail stuff because they know then you're going to see it. So if it's a text message, let's say that they're blocked, then they know their text message or email is going to get through. So they'll mail stuff to your house. That's a pretty common thing. This type of person, it's like they have a playbook they all follow. So when someone says to me, you know, they mailed something to me, I'll say, well, is it this, or this? And they'll say, how did you know? And I'll be like, because this is usually what they do. You know,
what is it typically?
It's something like that. Something that the parent or grandparent has disagreed on. Sometimes it revolves around religion or something similar, and they'll send something that kind of undermines the parent's belief system or how they're parenting. You'll have people have split up and they'll just send random stuff like a Kleenex back. I mean, that's an extreme one, but they'll send something back that really didn't need to be sent back to the person. Trying to think of like a shirt that had no meaning whatsoever to that person, like no sentimental value whatsoever, and they'll mail the shirt back just to
Like it's
let
one of their
let you know.
shirts. Like, hey, I have
Like
your
it's
shirt.
like it's their former partner's shirt, and they're just trying to like and let the person know they're still there. So they'll mail it back like a year later, and they'll say stuff like, I just saw it in the house and I thought you should have it. And because it's a way to hoover you. It's a way to suck you back in a contact.
Oh man. Now,
So mailing stuff is pretty, or in what I call nastygram. They'll send a letter. Like I get letters from people that I'll be seeing their adult child, and I'll get letters, snail mail letters from the parent saying things like, my child hasn't told you the whole story, and here's the whole story. And then as the letter goes, they'll start out pretty coherent, and then by the end of it, it's just not making a lot of sense. It's like the rage comes through in the letter. And the way I do things is if I get anything, an email, phone call, snail mail from someone, and you have a right to know that as a client in therapy. But I certainly don't contact those people back because usually, that person's like, I'll say, do you want to sign a release of information with anybody? And they'll say, well, just with my doctor. So I'm not legally allowed to talk to that person anyway. Not that I think that would even be helpful, because it wouldn't.
Right.
But I let people know, or I'll get voicemail messages saying, well, this person isn't saying the whole story. And it's different than a spouse saying, hey, I'm just calling. I know that you can't call me back, but my spouse said something about suicide and I'm concerned. That's different than someone calling, leaving me a 5-minute voicemail or whatever the time limit is on voicemails, telling me how bad that person is.
So that's more about the manipulation, right? That's going back to the manipulation you talked about, right?
Right, because they know that some of their stuff's being uncovered, and so they kind of panic.
God, that's just the things you see. I can't even imagine. I do want to get back to the people who are more susceptible, just to being on the receiving.
Oh yeah, we didn't
end.
even talk about that yet.
I know, because you talked about the grieving process. You said if someone has maybe a chronic disease or a disability, a medical condition, tell me more about the grieving. That's interesting to me. Like someone who's just in the process.
Sure. So someone that has had family members pass away, or if they've been through the loss of a dream, like they've worked towards something and then it didn't work out. Anybody that's going through loss, which we all have in different degrees, pet loss that we just recently talked. We both have been through that. So, you don't feel like yourself, and it takes a little while, sometimes a long while, to feel like you're kind of back to being yourself, and things will never be the same, but you start feeling more like yourself. Someone that preys upon that knows that you are vulnerable, and grief makes us sometimes not think too clearly, especially if we have loss of sleep, if we are just trying to get through the day. And in the US anyway, it's not like you can take a lot of time off if you work for a corporation if you have grief, right? It's not like you can go, I'm taking off, 8 weeks because somebody died. Unless you have a workplace that's very nice about that, or you take family medical leave. But we tend to just not be ourselves. And so the gaslighter, narcissist, toxic person picks up on that, and they know that they can you'll let some behavior slide because you're not fully paying attention to them because you're overcome with grief. And it's like I see cases where it's someone lost their spouse, and the spouse handled all the money stuff. So when the spouse dies, when you have somebody that says, hey, I'll take care of all the finances, don't worry about it, it can feel like a huge relief, especially when you're in the throes of grief. And then that person starts, you've signed over your assets and they control all of them. Because again, you're not fully thinking clearly. Yeah. And it may be under duress, you're being pressured. So again, because of grief, we aren't ourselves.
Yeah. I was just thinking if somebody would come in and say, let me take care of it all for you. Because I remember grieving my mother. I was like, if someone could have just come in and cooked for, handled it all.
Like it's hard to just do your daily. Yeah. I mean, my mom's died too. So, and we talked about that you just try to get through the day, especially in the very beginning, So yeah. So someone can kind of swoop in there and say, I'll take care of the stuff. And you're like, how great that someone's doing that.
Right.
Because I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other. So that's great. And this type of personality knows that also if you're in a helping profession, like a teacher, mental health counselor, you are a medical professional, that you're more likely to accept a wide range of behaviors, because I wouldn't be in the profession I was in if I didn't think people could change.
Mm-hmm.
So they specifically pick up on people that are more accepting of a range of behaviors, or people that are looking at potential rather than where that person's actually at.
That's interesting. I wouldn't even thought that.
And that goes for friendships too.
What do you like for in the helping?
You'll
profession?
see friends. Yeah, you'll see friends that only will want to be around you when something's bad's happening. And when things are going good, they're actually kind of detached from you.
Oh,
and that's a sign of, that there's something about that vulnerability that's drawing them in. Mm-hmm. But when something good happens, they're just not there. Yeah. So that's not a healthy relationship. There's not equal social reciprocity or give and take.
Okay. So I like what you just said.
Kind of
there.
vampiring.
Right. Yeah. So equal social
right. When things are good and bad. Reciprocity is hard to say. Yeah, it's hard to say. But yeah, when you have equal give and take, it's a sign of a healthy relationship. Now, it doesn't mean you can't say no. And I always say no is a complete sentence. If you have a friend say, hey, can you help me move? And you're like, no, I can't. Then that should just be taken as your answer. But that doesn't mean it's not that you're not a good friend. It just could be that you have stuff going on, but you still kind of talk about it. That friend is an issue. You can talk about it later without raising voices, with just having a conversation. That's a healthy friend. An unhealthy friend would hold a grudge against you, would be passive aggressive. You'd say, is there anything wrong? They say, nope, nothing's wrong. Nope. That classic, not going to talk about it, but they will be very cold to you. Or there's also stonewalling, where someone just completely ignores you. And that's a form of emotional abuse. That's different than blocking somebody because they're abusive. Mm-hmm. Stonewalling is you reacted that way because someone set a boundary with you. Mm-hmm. Or you think that they're quote unquote disloyal to you, and it's not a realistic loyalty. And then you just totally freeze them out. And I tell people, I'm like, that constitutes that you're ending the relationship if you stonewall somebody. You've made that decision without actually saying it.
Right. So knowing that this is tricky behavior, this is one that you could, someone's giving you all the praise, and it could easily sneak up on you. And I imagine the person on the receiving end, it questions themselves a lot. Like, no, it's good. Yes, it's not. So how do people walk away from a toxic relationship?
If you don't have kids with someone, you can go no contact, which means you can stop phone calls, you can block their phone numbers, block emails, block social media, because they will purposely post stuff on social media to reel you back in. That's the best way to do it. And people don't make that decision lightly. This is something that's done when someone has deeply hurt them and that person does not have their best interest in them. If you have kids with somebody, you usually can't go no contact, so you can go low contact. And for co-parenting, I recommend using a co-parenting app instead of talking on the phone or by email, because whenever you talk on the phone with someone that has a high conflict parenting style, it usually devolves into an argument or guilting or shaming. So a co-parenting app, you're more likely to have everything stay above board and you have a record of everything. Also talking to a good family law attorney, and there are pro bono family law attorneys available, and you can say to them, hey, I think I was a victim of domestic violence. I think that this person has narcissistic tendencies, and a good family law attorney will know exactly what that means and will know how to handle that situation. And it's also important to know what your rights are and what your kids' rights are.
What about with friendships? Friendships, is it, again, you just block someone out and you're just done just because you don't have to?
Yeah. And sometimes it depends on the person, but sometimes you just can't, it's not safe or healthy for you to go through a, hey, this isn't working out thing. And I was interviewed a couple of days ago about what's interesting about ghosting. Ghosting to me is when you have things are healthy, but it may just be that you're not interested in that person. But you don't want to do the proper thing, which is to tell the person, right? Because that's taking responsibility for things. So you kind of exit. But this is where someone's had a pattern of behavior that is abusive, that is not in your best interest, and you're blocking them. That's different than ghosting somebody. Ghosting someone's like I just want to avoid that awkward conversation.
Got it. And with work, I'm assuming if you're in a work toxic relationship, I mean, you have to have some financial backup. You can't, not everyone can just leave. Are there any thoughts about leaving a toxic workplace?
Sometimes people have left, even though they don't have a backup, and that's hard, but we have to look at what's the emotional and physical cost to you, because people have developed things like ulcers, their existing medical conditions have gotten worse because of the stress. And with that, you can see if your workplace has an HR manual or employee manual where you can see how do you report harassment. Because if you are being manipulated or gaslit at work, you may qualify for protections. And part of that is from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is part of the federal government. And you may qualify for legally filing a complaint against them. Now, usually what that means is you have to have had filed a complaint against the company at the HR level for you to get possibly an okay from the government to file. And then there's also exceptions. Like if your employer has, this many employees or less, then they don't need to follow that. So it's really tricky. But with the workplace, sometimes you can get transferred to another department, transfer another floor. You can remove yourself from a project. And if you have a healthy boss, you can say, hey, there's just a dynamic here that's not healthy, and I really don't want to be part of that. But if you have a toxic boss, they may manipulate you into working on projects with people that they just don't want to work with, so they're putting you on the project. That happens a lot. Or they will give you a bad performance review, even though there's been no indication that you've not met job expectations, because it's a power and control move, because they want to see you squirm. They will also tell you that your coworkers have said bad things about you. This type of person will have a real need to excel through the company to the detriment of everyone else. They will burn the company down if they don't get what they need. That's the type of person that you might be dealing with. Or they will try to get you alone in the workplace. So they will schedule things so that you're the only person left on the floor that day. And so you need to make sure that whenever you have a meeting with this person, first, you're never alone with them. And then if you schedule a meeting with them, that you have a witness, and they refuse to have a witness, then you document that. And it's really important to document what's happening. So the date, the time, if you have any direct quotes, and also if you're documenting things, don't put it on an employee-owned device, because if you're quitting or you get fired, they will immediately take those devices from you. So you want to make sure you put on your personal device any documentation. And you can go to a labor attorney specialized in workplace issues and talk to them about what you've experienced.
Yeah, I know I've had the situation where it wasn't me, but somebody else was saying they're being gaslighted, but it was actually the employee who was causing all the drama and problems. Mm-hmm. And the boss was being explicitly clear. But she was kind of throwing around the terms going, you're gaslighting me. But it was really just, she wasn't doing her job. So
right.
The documentation is very important.
It's very important. Yeah. Yeah. And I also wrote an article for Psychology Today about what happens when a gaslighter calls you a gaslighter, because that's a pretty common thing they do. Or they'll call you abusive when they're abusive. And again, that's projection. They're calling you what they are. So again, it might be that you show no signs of having an affair, and they will all of a sudden come home and say, you were 15 minutes late from work. I know you're having an affair with so-and-so. Show me your phone. When in fact, this type of personality, they tend to have multiple affairs at once because there's this insatiable need for attention. And a relationship, once it gets past the love bombing stage and things start getting real, and you start getting devalued, eventually you'll get discarded, which means that they will go to a new source of what's called narcissistic supply, or they will just rotate through their narcissistic supply that's been lined up. So that tends to be a pretty common thing, because they're trying to fill this bottomless pit of need with people, and there's never a person that will ever be enough to make them, that gives them the attention they need.
Well, Stephanie, I'm glad you feel like people have hope, because talking about these behaviors makes me go, good Lord, like it's a scary world out there. And, I know that the holidays are coming up, at least when people will be listening to this, it'll be around holiday time. And we have to sometimes be around toxic family members. Right. So what do you recommend for people having to walk into that situation?
So that's a low contact method, which means that it might be that you set a time limit on how long you're going to be at a gathering, or you have a separate gathering. So let's say that you decide that you're going to go to Thanksgiving with your family, and you know that a certain person is going to be there. You can have a healthy friend or family member come with you kind of as a buffer, which means that that person, if they see that person coming towards you, they kind of, talk to that person and kind of distract them. And then you go. And you also have a nonverbal signal between the two of you that means that I need to get out now. If you feel like, listen to your intuition. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And you can also do something called gray rock method, which means that you just react in the most boring, bland, uninteresting way possible if someone tries to bait you. So let's say like your aunt knows that if she brings up your kids and your parenting, because that's something that is something near and dear to us, right? Like the way you can really get to somebody is criticize their parenting. I feel like I'm giving instructions to people. Don't do that to people. But you know that your aunt's going to do that. That's her thing. That's how she gets to you, because you tend to get agitated by that, because who doesn't? If they bring that up, first you have the buffer person say, hey, how about those gators, or how about those tigers? Because you went to Auburn, right? So how about blah, blah, blah. So, or are you the war eagles? What are you? What is Auburn?
Yeah, we're
tigers.
Yeah, we're the tigers.
Aren't you tigers?
Yes,
you're both, right?
We're both. With our war eagle's like our cry, but we also have an eagle as a mascot. But Auburn
so
the tiger. We have two.
So you have double. That's cool.
Yeah, and we still suck at football, so it's not helping.
Well, the Gators are kind of in the same place right now. So you have that person act as a buffer and bring up another topic that's unrelated, or you just respond with I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree. So with gray rock method, a friend of mine has a really good method of doing this. There was someone that was kind of getting in her face and raising their voice. And with the gray rock method, you respond with confusion or just really blandly. And so this guy's yelling just for, no real solid reason. And she just said, I'm confused why you're raising your voice. And he automatically started lowering his voice because he didn't get a rise out of her. He didn't get the ego boost that he wanted out of her yelling back, right? Or the attention seeking that he wanted. And so that's a really good method of doing it. She's very good at that. So she just said, yeah, I'm really confused as to why you're raising your voice, or I'm really confused as to why you're yelling. So if you have someone in your life that baits you, first try to limit your contact with that person. And then if they do try to bait you, like especially during the holidays at family gatherings, you just say, I'm really confused why you brought that up. I don't really know why you would say that. Huh. That's interesting. And that really diffuses people because they feed off of your energy. So they're like energy vampires. If you don't give them a response that is emotionally loaded, they will tend to back down.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to start using that with my son. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. So you can't always be gray rock, but it really helps if you are. But we also have to forgive ourselves too, because we can't always be like just flat.
Right.
So we also need to just give ourselves some leeway and some grace to say, you know what, this person is purposely trying to poke, purposely trying to aggravate. And if I respond in a way that isn't like me, that's actually okay, because that's what that person was trying to do. And it doesn't mean that person won. It just means that we're human. But if you can do gray rock, that's great. I mean, my friend has superhuman ability to be diplomatic. I do not have that.
It's an amazing quality. It really is.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And so he walked off. So I think that we really haven't been taught how to handle people that are purposely trying to start a fight. We don't really talk about that. If families have talked about that, that's amazing. But most of the time we don't talk about, in society anyway, about and like just a base level of what's a healthy and unhealthy person. What are setting boundaries? What does that mean? What does it mean when you enforce a boundary and the person doesn't react the way that you wish that they would? Mm-hmm. And I tell people that just because someone reacts to a boundary in an unfavorable way doesn't mean that you didn't have a right to set the boundary. You're going to have people that if they don't have your best interest in mind, when you set a boundary, they're going to react with yelling, stonewalling, manipulation. But a healthy person says, okay, thanks. I'm really glad you let me know that. And your relationship actually becomes stronger because you set that boundary.
Yeah. One thing, this just made me think of this. In one of your articles I was reading, you were talking about how if you set a boundary, that person, the toxic person, is going to get pissed. And sometimes you see the behavior, but another person doesn't. And you just talked about how they may not see the behavior because they haven't set the boundary. So it sounds like it's really tricky to spot this because that person, I guess, decides what they show to a different set of people, right? Like, so
right.
Maybe that guy's not angry with everyone, but the dog park people is going to see it.
Right. Right. And I think once you know more about it, you'll see the red flags really early on. And so when you go to a job interview, you'll say, okay, this, and this don't feel right. Something's off. There are red flags. And listen to that. Because I think when you've been in a relationship or in a workplace or friendship like this or in your family, you may discount that intuition because you've been told don't feel, don't talk, lay low. So when you get that feeling, you may just kind of dismiss it, but it's really important to listen to that inner voice that says something's off.
Yeah, your body will tell you.
Your body tells you. Yeah, and we have all different ways of doing that. So when I talk with people, I'll draw a stick figure and say, okay, let me know, what does your body feel like when you're under stress or you get a red flag? Because it's really important to pay attention to that. Or on a first date, if you have somebody that is just talking about themselves, doesn't ask about you, and you go, that's interesting. I don't know if I'm into that. That's a red flag. Mm-hmm. So, or a real telltale one is if they are rude to the servers.
That's the worst.
Yeah, because on a first date, you should be on your best behavior, right? So if you are being rude to a server, that's an automatic just get up and leave. Mm-hmm. And I think in society, we have an issue with looking rude. We don't want to look rude. So
especially for women.
Right. There's additional pressure to not be rude. We need to really work on that and be okay with leaving when there's a situation that's not good for us. If you know that someone's done something that just goes against so much of what you believe in how people should be treated, it's okay to say, you know what, this isn't going to work out. And here's like $10 on the table or whatever. And then sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah. And that's an ingrained concept. I know for me as a 40 something woman to just be nice. Right. And so
right. That's what we're taught.
Used to, getting used to just saying, okay, this is my boundary and I need to do this for me.
Right. And you can be nice and set boundaries at the same time.
Right. Yes. And no is a complete sentence, right?
No is a complete sentence. Yes.
You can also say, no, I'm not going to that gathering. End of story.
Right. And if someone says, well, why not? You can just say, no, I just can't go. So you do broken record technique. So you just repeat the same thing. It's kind of like kids when they keep asking the same question, you just answer with asked and answered. And then they get tired of it. So when you're with someone that says, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? And you say, you know what? I think, Liam, let's just talk about something else. This is
right.
Or you just repeat the same answer.
Right.
Yeah. So because you're not giving them bait, so they're not getting a payoff. And when people don't get a payoff, they tend to cease the behavior. Yeah. Or you may just need to walk off. And that's hard. Mm-hmm. That's not something people do easily. It takes some oomph. I can't think of a better word to do that. And it may feel really strange. And it may feel like you're not being nice, but sometimes you got to enforce your boundaries. And that means that you are not going to be spoken to that way. Or let's say someone starts bringing up something that's embarrassing to you in front of the family at a family gathering because they know that that's going to put you on the spot. And you can just say, yeah, I'm not talking about that. And if they continue, then you just say, yep, I need to go. This isn't appropriate. And then you leave.
I think
because what they'll do is they'll make the focus on you instead of them. Instead of on their inappropriate behavior, they'll make the focus on you getting upset about it.
Right. Making you feel bad because you are getting upset. It's no big deal.
Right. Like, why are you so sensitive?
Yeah. Oh,
right? That's a really common one.
Yeah.
I was just making a joke.
Right. I didn't mean it that way.
Right.
Right.
You misunderstood me.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think that has given people hopefully some ammunition to take into these family gatherings. But before we close out, Stephanie, are there any last thoughts you want to leave the listeners with? Anything I didn't ask you or you think is important to add?
it's important to know that people do go on to having healthy relationships, and also that counseling can be really helpful for working through trauma that you've been through with a toxic person, and also any patterns that you have that you feel like you want to change in order to have a happy, healthier life. It's possible. It can be hard work, but it's worth it.
Yeah, great advice. Because I think people probably do feel like no one will ever love me anymore, or I can't get into a healthy relationship. So
I think that's a very normal feeling to have. And that's the other thing, is understand that the way you're feeling is normal.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie, where can people find out more about you?
At stephaniesarkis.com, there's a blog there that has the podcast episodes on it. It's a Talking Brains podcast. And it also, there are Psychology Today articles and the Forbes articles. And at Forbes, I write about sociopathy, narcissism, gaslighting in the workplace.
All right. I'll link
stephaniesarkis.com.
Yeah. I'll link them all up in the show notes. And Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.